John Mateer's got a big challenge ahead of him. So he was at Washington State this past season. In 2023, he was the backup to Cam Ward. You didn't even know who he is. Heck, I barely knew who he is, and I'm a Pac-12 kind of guy. R.I.P. Mateer was a wildcat quarterback that came in some trick play packages in 2023 in Pullman. And then all of a sudden, he gets the keys to the kingdom because Cam Ward goes to Miami, and he absolutely blossoms and does more than I thought he was capable of. I just didn't know that much about him. Most people didn't, but we all know about him now. And here he is, 2 short seasons later, ready to become the starting quarterback for the Oklahoma Sooners in the SEC. That's a pretty rapid progression. And reportedly, he has an NIL deal that over the next 2 seasons, if he stays at Oklahoma, is worth $3 million. So, $1.5 million-ish per year. That's in line with what's been reported before. The high-end quarterback deals, maybe $2 to $3 million a year. But typically, Matt Rule, I think, laid out, or was one of the first coaches to say publicly a while back that, if you want a great quarterback nowadays, $1 to $2 million a year. Thought you might be curious. That was reported over at On3, the $3 million deal. But John Mateer last season bursts onto the scene and now has a significant challenge ahead of him on 2 fronts. But the numbers last year were pretty undeniable. He was my number 1 transfer portal quarterback. There was no other signal caller that was entering the portal that I thought that had a higher ceiling. That's the way that I look at it here. But I'll come back to Cam Ward here in just a moment. Mateer, last season at Washington State, 65%, over 3,100 yards, 29 touchdowns, 7 picks. He also ran for 826 yards and 15 touchdowns. That's defining dual threat. There were times Washington State never crafted a significantly impactful running game in the last couple of years. They were an air raid team. Mateer was routinely their leading rusher. Now, the challenge that he's going to face is twofold. And let's start with the caliber of competition, because that's a legitimate question to ask. And you need look no further than his predecessor at Washington State. Because Cam Ward began his career at Incarnate Word. That's an FCS school in the Southland Conference. He was there and went to Washington State. And when you watch Ward in his first season, he was kind of Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. But there were a lot of moments that certainly have stuck with him as he gets ready to get taken in the first round of the NFL draft, where he made plays that you watched and went, Cam, you can make that play at Incarnate Word. You can't make that play at Washington State. Is it the same level of jump in competition to go from Washington State to the SEC as the FCS to Pullman in the Pac-12? Probably not. But it's still a jump. There is still a gap. Washington State's schedule last season had Portland State, it's an FCS school, then their best wins of the year. Remember, Washington State was discussed last season on this show, and maybe lightly on some others, but not as much, as, hey, could they be a college football playoff team? Well, they were starting to have the resume to do it, and then it all fell apart in the second half of the season. It's kind of how Jake Dickert's teams operated in Pullman the last couple of years, unfortunately for the Cougs. But you had Portland State, Texas Tech, you had Washington. Oh, right, everything's going great. San Jose State, they put up 54 points. Defense wasn't doing a lot. They lose at Boise State. Then it's Fresno State, Hawaii, San Diego State, Utah State, New Mexico, Oregon State, Wyoming. Okay, not here to disrespect those programs and what they've done in the Mountain West in the last several years of the Pac-12, depending on which school you're talking about there, but it's going to be a little bit different for the Sooners, who are in their second straight year of wondering how in the world they have their schedule while Texas has theirs in the SEC. Oklahoma plays Michigan week 2. They play Auburn a couple weeks later. They've got Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Bama, and LSU, and Missouri to round out the second half of the season. So this is going to be a significant jump, and Mateer has got a lot of talent, immense potential, can absolutely step in and thrive. But this is a question that I'm going to be asking for the Sooners quarterback going into this year. Are you ready to go up against the SEC? And look, I have been one of many people that I know of in this content space that have looked at the SEC in the past year and said, yeah, it's not the big bad wolf that it used to be when I was a kid, because guess what? It's not. It's still a higher level of competition than what you were facing before. So that's the first challenge that John Mateer has. Here's the second challenge that John Mateer faces going into the season with Oklahoma. There's a lot of turnover for the Sooners, and he's trying to elevate guys who are trying to make that same sort of jump for the most part on the perimeter. So expected to be his top 3 receivers, according to Jay Smith of Locked On Sooners, who I consider an incredibly reliable source. Let's start with Deion Burks, because he got hurt last year, because if you were a wide receiver at Oklahoma in the year 2024, you got hurt. It's just what you did, Mom. All the cool kids were doing it, so I did it too. And they were incredibly decimated by the end of the season. But Deion Burks and John Mateer could be the most electric tandem in the entire SEC. If Mateer translates well with the Sooners, and he's got his offensive coordinator, Ben Arbuckle, coming with him from Washington State as well, and if Deion Burks is back healthy, Deion Burks 2 years ago at Purdue averaged 13.4 yards a catch. He missed 7 games this past season for the Sooners. You get him back healthy, that can be a lethal combination. But they're bringing up a couple of guys who they feel are going to be able to make a jump in competition level, because Giovanni Gibson was an FCS All-American second team at Arkansas Pine Bluff this past year. 70 catches, over 1,200 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Well, that's phenomenal production. But routinely, top JUCO players, and he was an FCS guy, slightly different, but, same sort of vibe. Top JUCO players routinely do not even end up having a significant role. Look at Malik Benson, for instance. He was a guy that came from the JUCO ranks where he was an All-American caliber player, and he went to Alabama, couldn't crack the rotation. Went to Florida State, might have been their top target, but they didn't have a great passing offense. He's at Oregon now. We'll see if he works his way into the fold in that receiving core. But it's not always as seamless when you're making that big of a jump forward. That's just one example. I'm sure there are others of success. But this is something that the entire Oklahoma offense is going to have me watching this year. I mean, I was going to be tuned in anyway because I love college football, but I also used to live in this great state of Oklahoma, and Oklahoma's golf course in Norman, really, really cool. But that's not the only reason I was going to be tuned in, because there's also Keontez Lewis, who will probably be in the fold. He was at Southern Illinois this past year, another FCS school. 819 yards. Good season. 2 years ago at Wisconsin, 2022, at Wisconsin, he had 313 yards receiving. He redshirted in 2023. So John Mateer has to work in 2 brand new receivers who are making a step up in competition just like he is. He's got to figure out the offensive line. He's on a new team now, and he's got to figure out if Deion Burks is going to be healthy throughout the course of the year. Again, I'm not doubting he's got the talent to do it, because I'm bullish on John Mateer. He was my top transfer portal quarterback in this past cycle. There is no one who I thought was more valuable to quarterback position that transferred. And yes, I'm including Carson Beck in that world. Carson Beck would probably be number 2, and I think he could absolutely thrive down at Miami. But these are questions, not doubts or even concerns, really. These are just questions that John Mateer and the Sooners have to be able to answer if they want a bounce-back season and they want to navigate the schedule. What did they do to tick off the SEC? Texas at South Carolina, Ole Miss at Tennessee, at Bama, host Missouri, host LSU. What? Gross. You have to go at Bama and then have a bye, or at Tennessee, have a bye, then at Bama. That's gross.